We were just neighbors. That's all we ever were, until he knocked at midnight, and I opened the door in my robe. And in the quiet between us, everything changed. My name is Elaine Parker. I'm 48 years old, and I live in a two-story colonial at the end of Maple Ridge Lane, the kind of street where the lawns are trimmed to perfection, the mailboxes match, and every holiday brings a new competition for porch decorations. I used to love this life. At least, I thought I did. When Rob and I moved in 17 years ago, everything felt new. Back then, we were still holding hands, still staying up too late, still trying to have a baby. But that was before the miscarriages. Before the disappointment settled into our walls like dust we couldn't clean. We stopped trying, stopped laughing, stopped seeing each other. Now, we share space more than a life. Rob manages a logistics warehouse and tracks our utilities like it's a sport. He's never been unkind. Just routine. Predictable. A man who sets the thermostat to exactly 70 every night and falls asleep to the 10 o'clock news. Our kids, well, one kid, Tyler, left for college 3 years ago. Since then, it's just been us. And silence. The kind that creeps in between dinner bites and echoes off bedroom walls. I started talking to myself. Not in a crazy way, just little things. Narrating my day. Filling in the blanks where Rob used to ask how I was. I would sit at the kitchen table and stare at the empty chair across from me, wondering when I became invisible in my own home. And then Cal moved in next door. It was mid-April when I first saw him. I remember because the dogwoods were blooming, and I had just pruned the rose bushes in the front yard. A moving truck backed into the driveway next door, the Simmons place. It had been empty for months after Barbara passed and her kids sold it. I watched from the kitchen window, pretending to wipe the counter. He stepped out of the cab wearing jeans, boots, and a worn gray t-shirt that clung to his back. He didn't have a moving crew. Just him and what looked like his younger brother or friend. They barely spoke. Just lifted, hauled, unloaded. Efficient. I brought over a pie. Peach crumble. It was still warm, and I felt silly walking over with it, like some desperate sitcom housewife. But my hands needed to do something. My heart needed to be noticed. He opened the door shirtless. That part one remembered too well. He was laughing deep, unfiltered laughter that felt like something I hadn't heard in a long time. He stopped when he saw me, his smile lingering. "You didn't have to do that," he said, nodding toward the pie. "I wanted to," I replied. He introduced himself as Cal, short for Calvin, but he never used it. Said it made him sound like someone's pastor. He was from Illinois. Worked in custom cabinetry. Divorced. No kids. Miss Elaine, he started calling me, like I was some Southern belle. It made me laugh. It made me blush. It made me forget. I started noticing the way he moved. The way he stood when he talked, like he wasn't in a hurry to get away. How his eyes held mine just a second longer than they should have. He'd mow his lawn shirtless. Not in a showy way. Just comfortable in his skin. Confident. The opposite of Rob, who mowed with a sun hat and long sleeves and sunscreen applied twice. One afternoon, my car wouldn't start. Rob was on a business trip in Columbus. I opened the hood and stared at the engine like it would reveal its secrets. Cal must have seen me from his porch. He walked over, toolbox in hand, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Battery's probably dead," he said after a few minutes. "Mind if I jump it?" "Please," I said, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. I was still in yoga pants and an old college sweatshirt. He leaned over the engine, arms flexing, the scent of sawdust and something masculine clinging to his skin. When he finished, the car purred back to life. I thanked him. He looked at me then, really looked. "Hard to believe a woman like you's ever stuck," he said. And then he winked. That night, I stood in the shower and let the water run until it went cold. My mind played the moment on a loop. From then on, things changed. I started dressing up to get the mail. Rob didn't notice. Or maybe he did and didn't care. He stopped asking why I wore perfume on Tuesdays. I baked more. Walked the dog more. Pretended to check the gutters just to be outside when Cal was. We'd talk. Harmless things. Weather. Work. life. But there was always something unsaid beneath it. He noticed details. Told me I had a beautiful laugh. That my hair caught the sun. That he liked how I spoke with my hands. No man had complimented me like that in years. Not in a way that wasn't obligation. Then came the storm. It was a Thursday night. The kind of storm that rolls in sudden and angry. Wind shook the shutters. Rain lashed against the windows. I couldn't sleep. Rob was out cold, mouth open, snoring lightly. I slipped out of bed, wrapped myself in my robe, and padded downstairs to check the windows. That's when I heard it. 3 soft knocks. I froze. My heart stuttered. Who knocks at midnight? I peered through the peephole. It was him. Cal, soaked to the bone. His shirt clung to him. His hair dripped. He looked up at the door like he wasn't sure he should be there. I opened it. You okay? I asked, heart pounding. He shrugged. Power's out. My phone died. I didn't know who else. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come. No, I said quickly. Come in. He stepped inside. Rain pooled at his feet. We stood there, inches apart. Thunder cracked. He looked at me. Not past me. Not through me. At me. And in that moment, something shifted. Something irreversible. I closed the door. His scent was still on the couch cushion. I remember standing there the next morning in the living room, the one we'd barely spoken in, barely moved in, and yet something heavy still lingered in the air. Not just him, but what almost happened. What wanted to happen. The storm had passed, but inside me, something hadn't. I couldn't look at the couch without remembering how close he stood. How his wet shirt clung to him. How the power came back on and neither of us moved. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Rob, staring at the ceiling, every minute a sharp reminder of how numb my life had become. And I hated myself for it. Because I didn't do anything. But in my heart, I knew. I had already left. I avoided Cal. For days. I'd see him pulling weeds or working on that cabinet in his garage, and I'd duck behind the kitchen curtain like a teenager. Pathetic. But one Friday afternoon, I was coming back from the grocery store, and there he was, standing at the edge of his driveway, arms crossed, like he was waiting. I didn't have the energy to fake surprise. I just stared at him. He didn't smile. Just nodded once. Can we talk? I said nothing. My fingers gripped the grocery bags so tightly, my knuckles turned white. He stepped closer. Elaine, please. So I followed him into his garage. The air smelled like sawdust and varnish. There was half a cabinet against the wall, tools scattered everywhere. It felt like a place where things got built. Or destroyed. I haven't stopped thinking about that night, he said. I didn't come over because of the power. I couldn't sleep. I needed to see you. You shouldn't say that. My voice cracked. I know. He looked down at his hands, rough and splintered. But I meant it. We stood in silence for a long time. I didn't come here to hurt you, he said. But you looked at me like no one had in years. And I'm married, I snapped. Too sharp. Too late. He nodded slowly. Are you happy? The question burned. I used to be. He stepped closer, close enough to touch, but he didn't. Instead, he lifted his hand and let it hover near my cheek, then dropped it. Just tell me I imagined it, he said softly. And I couldn't. Because we hadn't crossed the line. Not with hands. Not with lips. But we'd leapt across it in every other way. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Rob. I stared at his name and didn't answer. I told Cal I had to go. And I left. But my body was shaking the whole walk home, /N. That night, I cried in the shower. And the next morning, I made pancakes I didn't eat. I folded laundry I didn't need to. I tried to outrun the guilt. But it caught up. Every time I passed the window, I wondered if he was watching. And I hated how much I wanted him to be. Tuesday afternoon. Rob came home early. I was in the kitchen making lemon bars, like sugar could cover sin. He walked in stiff. Pale. Holding his phone. Elaine, he said, voice flat. Why was our neighbor at the door last week at midnight? I froze. My stomach hollowed out. He turned the phone to me, Footage from the doorbell camera. 3 knocks. Cal, soaked, my hand on the door. The moment I let him in. Rob, it's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. I opened my mouth, but the truth had no shape I could form. No, I whispered. I didn't. But you wanted to, he finished. Jesus, Elaine. He didn't yell. That's what cut the deepest. He walked to the bedroom. 15 minutes later, he came out with a duffel bag. I don't know what hurts more, he said, what you did, or how easy it was for you to hide it. I didn't mean to. I was lonely. I was. So was I, he said. But I didn't look over the fence. And then he walked out the door. It's been 28 days. Rob hasn't come home. Cal's house is dark. The blinds are drawn. A moving truck showed up last weekend. He didn't say goodbye. The woman who moved in wears bright scarves and says she's a yoga teacher. She waved when she saw me pruning the roses. I waved back, barely. The couch cushion is still dented where Cal sat. Some mornings, I sit beside it with coffee gone cold, wondering how it all unraveled over a knock. How you can build a life for 2 decades and lose it in a breath. Rob left his ring on the nightstand. I haven't put mine back on. He left the ring. I left everything else.